Hello, my name is Nick Lubinsky. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Quantum Nutrition Labs, and today I'm going to be presenting your supplements beyond the certificate of analysis, where trust is earned. Trust is at the core of this presentation because there's a trust issue with this industry. In fact, the Nutrition Business Journal has recognized the number one trend by consumers is the lack of confidence. And even the FDA has recognized that there's an issue with this industry. Stephen Tave, the director of Office of Dietary Supplements, said, "I think we can comfortably say, at a minimum, that the dietary supplement market isn't perfectly regulated." And I have an issue with this statement because there's plenty of regulation. There's actually just a lack of enforcement. With only 50 people in the dietary supplement office and over 10,000 manufacturers in the world, with only 500 of those being inspected, there's just not enough people to keep up. And the industry growing at 6% a year and many, many new manufacturers joining that 10,000, there's just not enough people. The consumer expects three things from a dietary supplement. One, that it's safe to consume. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to kill you. Two, whatever it claims is in there, and nothing else. Three, that if there's any claims of health benefits, that there's some science to back that up. And today I'm going to be going through several examples of what we found at Quantum Nutrition Labs in our materials that we got samples of, and the adulteration that's rampant in this industry. And even though you may do the minimum requirements by law, you still can make a adulterated dietary supplement. To begin, I'm going to be going over some of the recent or the history of industry events since the beginning of the regulations of the dietary supplement industry. In 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was signed into law. This was done by, at the time, President Bill Clinton, and this protected your right as a consumer to purchase dietary supplements. It also had many other aspects to this act, and one of the aspects is that before October 15th, 1994, anything in the market is considered grandfathered in, meaning it's considered safe. And those ingredients, unfortunately, has been very difficult to determine at that time. Because back then, floppy disks were around. Many people today don't have the technology that we did back then to be able to even read those floppy disks. Also, the enforcement of this pre-old dietary ingredient for any new consumer or new manufacturer is that if the ingredient is new, meaning it was made after 1994, October 15th, then it has to go through some kind of evaluation for toxicity and safety. And this has to be presented to the Office of Dietary Supplements 75 days before it goes to market. Since 1994, there has been a difference of 4,000 supplements on the market to now being 80,000 or maybe 90,000 supplements on the market. And of these submissions that are supposed to occur, only about 1,300 have occurred. So there's a big disparity between what should be happening right now and what's actually happening. And the FDA is still trying to understand how to control this because with only 50 people and the industry growing by 6, this year expected by 12%, that the FDA cannot keep up with this. So as you see through the next couple slides, that the FDA keeps presenting ways to possibly regulate this, but no final answer has come from them. If you notice, 1994 to 2008, when the enforcement of GMPs, or good manufacturing practices, or current good manufacturing practices, is quite a few years. However, there's several events that have led to what the industry has been regulated by the FDA. First, in 1997, June 12, 1997, Chomper's Herbal Laxatives, which was supposed to be a plantain leaf, was accidentally switched out with something called foxglove. And this botanical actually contains a natural heart arrhythmia drug. This natural heart arrhythmia drug is good if you have a heart arrhythmia. However, people that don't can put you in the hospital. And that's exactly what happened. Because back then, when you got material in, which is supposed to be plantain leaf, you looked at the paperwork that came with it. It said it was plantain leaf, and you put a label on the product. Unfortunately, that material, because no verification of what it was done or performed, caused somebody to go to the hospital. And one of the reasons that nowadays, and even the beginning of CGMPs, the FDA really focused on identity to make sure the product is what it says it is. In 2007 and 2008, there was an adulteration by melamine. Melamine is a product that's used to make bowls. You see this at several different outlets, such as Bed Bath & Beyond. Has a high nitrogen content, and what they found was that if you put melamine into a substance, into a, let's say, protein, and you dilute the protein, meaning it's supposed to be 50% protein, but you dilute it to 45 or 40, and you put a very small amount of melamine in it, it can show by the analysis that it's really 50%, even though it's really not. So people do this to put extra money in their pockets. And this occurred in 2007 with pet feed. And they put a little bit of melamine in there, and all of a sudden these dogs started dying. Veterinarians noticed all these deaths. And the FDA put a statement out because they found melamine in the wheat gluten that was put into dog feed. Move forward to September 11, 2008, the same kind of incident happened with milk in China. And this milk found its way into baby formula. And 40,000 babies went to the hospital. So the need to look for this kind of adulteration, or adulteration in general, was a focus as well for the GMPs written by the FDA. In 2008, there was and you can look this probably up on YouTube, the dietary supplement that had 200 times the amount of labeled concentration of selenium. Now, selenium is necessary for health. You need to have that to maintain just good health in general. However, if you have 200 times the labeled concentration, what happens? Your fingernails start falling out, your hair starts falling out. And unfortunately, this is what happened. And people that were taking this supplement may have had a condition, and they thought their condition was getting worse. So they took more of the dietary supplement, putting some people in the hospital. So this is another issue with the FDA that they actually focused on testing for the concentration of the analytes that you labeled. In fact, something to note, there was so much selenium in this product that the manufacturer, when they were producing this batch, had the selenium literally coming out of solution, meaning there was selenium just sitting on the bottom. And what they do, they actually filtered it out with pantyhose. So this was a big problem. This was something they called dry labbing, where the company did not even test it. They just literally put it into a bottle and sold it. 2007, they made the CGMPs to be enforced in 2008, 2010. At the time, in 2009, when I joined Quantum Nutrition Labs, we were only a company of about 50 people. So we were able to start in April in 2009. I started. So in June 2009, June 25th, 2009 is when the enforcement began. And I got to see a little bit of what the Wild West was before GMPs and then what it became afterwards. And it's a big difference. In fact, from 2009, June 25th, 2009 to today, the regulations have not changed, but the enforcement and the interpretation has. Moving forward to 2011, you could see that the FESMA, Food Modernization Safety Act, which is one of the largest legislations done to the food industry ever, was put into place by Barack Obama. And which is interesting with this, it actually has some overlap with the dietary supplement industry, putting some responsibility back onto the raw material supplier, which is good. 2011 also, you see that new draft guidance for new dietary ingredients. What I mentioned earlier, that they're still having problems. And you could see this happen in 2016. They put another revised draft, but they're still not able to enforce it properly. 2015 was kind of the year the FDA and DOJ put their foot down. You saw in February 2nd, 2015, New York Attorney General went after large companies, Target, Walmart, GNC, and Walgreens, for not putting the right thing in their products, saying they put other items, or actually not the botanicals they listed at all. And at the end of the day, what that said is that even the retailers are responsible for the products they sell. Raw Deal, which was a company selling raw materials to manufacturers, was hiding fillers they're putting in the products, actually hiding it from the FDA during their inspection. Also in 2015, you saw USP Labs, which was a manufacturer that was putting supposedly natural plant extracts, but they were putting synthetics from China into their product. And 100 other companies were indicted for the same thing. Just recently, the CEO of that company and part of their operations unit was just sentenced to jail for many years. And then at the end, you see high-tech pharmaceuticals, which put Schedule III anabolic steroids into their product. You'll notice between 2017, I said earlier, every year there's some kind of adulteration, from illegal synthetic cannabinoids being put into CBD products and marijuana, leading to people dying from that. You notice in 2015 or 2018, August 15th, a Florida man plead guilty putting Viagra directly into their product. And you'll notice that the July 8th, 2019, there were a legal weight loss drug, sibutramine, putting into a weight loss supplement to give it that clinical effect, even though they're not claiming on the label. Because once you put a drug into a product, it will not be considered a dietary supplement anymore. It will be considered a drug, which is a whole set of new regulations, much more extensive regulations. In 2019, several other adulterations occurred. One was 2 unapproved drugs being put into dietary supplements from Basic Reset and Biogenics. Also, oregano. Oregano was cited to being significantly adulterated. What does that mean? Well, the oregano had many other substitutes or fillers, or was not really oregano when the products they tested. Why is oregano highly adulterated? Well, the issue is that whenever there is a material that's consumed more than is produced, such as even honey, there is adulteration that happens because the manufacturer or the vendor has a large order, and let's say they had 1,000 kilos they needed to fulfill, but they only have 500 kilos of material. So what do? They add more material in there of something else, and they sell it as a pure substance. And this is a common problem that this industry faces, usually at the end of a season of harvesting, because there's little supply. But it's a drive in this industry to meet consumer demand because of the constant growth. There's millions of dollars at play here, and people will look to make money any way they can. You'll notice at January 21st, 2020, ABH, which was a large contract manufacturer, which had violated CGMPs for many years, had a nationwide recall of the last 6 years' worth of products. This affected 859 different dietary supplement brands, because many brands do not necessarily manufacture their product. They have somebody else do that for them. And this manufacturer just wasn't doing the right thing, and the FDA came down and decided to recall many of the products. So what is CGMP? CGMP is current good manufacturing practices. Why is there a C? Why is there current? The regulations haven't changed since 2007. Well, science and technology has improved. There's constant innovation in this industry, and it's a requirement by the FDA that you keep up with this innovation. with this advancing technology. You cannot use the same methods that were initially instituted back in 2009, 2008 during the initial phase of enforcement to what it is today. And this is set of regulations oversees the whole part of a manufacturer's or private labeler's requirements, meaning the manufacturing, packaging, labeling, holding operations for a dietary supplement. "21 CFR 111, or the CGMPs, is a very extensive regulation with subparts A through P. And I'm not going to be going over all that today. I'm really going to focus on what specifications must you establish, or the process controls requirements. And the reason I choose this section is because of that 500 I mentioned earlier that are inspected every year, only 58% fail this part of the CGMPs. 58%. Either they're not testing properly, or they're just not testing at all. In fact, some industry experts estimate that over 20% of the manufacturers out there are not doing anything at all. I listed this part of the regulation here just to kind of speak about the generality of the actual regulation. So it says you must establish a specification for any point, step, or stage in the manufacturing process where control is necessary to ensure the quality of the dietary supplement, and that dietary supplement is packaged and labeled as specified in the master manufacturing record. Now, that's a very broad statement, very much made for this industry. Why? Because we're dealing with complex matrices. You're like, well, you're dealing with fruit powders and grasses. Well, those have thousands of phytochemicals in there. Depending how you manufacture it, do you extract it out with methanol or ethanol or water? Do you do some kind of other processing for that material? Will produce a different product with different possible side effects and different activity. So they had to make it very broad, very general, to be able to encompass what this industry can do. What type of testing is required? So in the 21 CFR 111, in the specification portion, you must establish an identity specification. And what the requirements say, it says at least one. And many manufacturers think that means only one test is required. And they do one of the tests, organoleptic, HPLC, TLC, FTIR, all these different methods, and may choose one because that's all that's technically required. What I'm going to show you today later on is what we do, our manufacturer does at Quantum Nutrition Labs to ensure that the supplement is clean, and why it takes many more than one test to ensure that. Also, you need to ensure purity, and that's, for example, a oil, to make sure that it hasn't rincidified, and that's part of the peroxide value. Strength, that the material claim that's on the label is what it says it is, and not extremely high if there's an upper intake limit like selenium, or it's not extremely low or not low at all, because this industry requires 100% of the label claim for the shelf life of that product, which is different than pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals, you're allowed a variance. So in this way, we're actually more stringent than pharmaceutical requirements. Composition, that the material, if it's supposed to be at a certain pH, that it is that certain pH. And limits for contaminants. And this is any contaminant, but the main ones people look at is pesticides, heavy metals, the microorganisms within the material. What should be the standard for testing? Well, I think what's something we need to recognize, and I'm going to go into more of the identity portion later, but we need to all make sure that the manufacturer is doing some kind of microbiological testing. And most of them do. Most companies do this as a minimum. And they're testing for total aerobic count, yeast and mold, coliform, salmonella, E. coli, and staph. However, especially with manufacturers that do fermentation, they should be looking at other organisms such as Bacillus cereus and Clostridia. Why? because they produce heat-stable toxins. And if you ferment anything, you're actually propagating the organisms within there. And even if you pasteurize or kill off those organisms later on, they can produce a toxin that's still present and actually can kill you. Listeria is another organism that's a concern, and all manufacturers should be looking for those in their sink, even though it may be low water content. Items that are such as ice cream, which we saw, earlier or years ago with Bluebell. Those products can have it naturally in the product. Luckily, with dietary supplements, that's a low risk to have it in the supplement, but could be somehow present somewhere else in the manufacturing plant and possibly be moved into the supplement by accident. So the manufacturers should be looking for this in their materials. Also, heavy metals. Heavy metals are done by most manufacturers. They look for lead, arsenic, cadmium, mercury. Something we're also doing as an additional item for our consumers is looking at nickel, tin, tungsten, and antimony, which are other heavy metals of concern. And this is something not normally performed by manufacturers, but there have been recalls for these items at being too high of a level in the products they sell. Also, pesticides should always be looked at by the manufacturer. Now, if you have organic material, many manufacturers do not test pesticides because it's supposed to be pesticide free. However, I can tell you from our own experience that the pesticide levels of organic sometimes can be higher than even what we find in regular material, because those organic fields are right next to non-organic fields, and those pesticides plumes will fly over to the organic fields and contaminating them. And they don't have necessarily the same washing procedures that the non-organic have to remove some of those pesticides. Aflatoxins. This is an interesting one, something I'm very passionate about, because aflatoxins are produced by mold. And this is a very carcinogenic item. Actually, I believe one of the most carcinogenic items known to man. And these are produced by molds that are naturally found in the environment, found in soil, which that's where botanicals come from. And many different materials such as cayenne pepper, of course corn, and many roots have presence of aflatoxin. And there's a limit set by the United States Pharmacopoeia of acceptable levels. However, we find many materials above this acceptable level. And in fact, we see extracts, which is actually the removal of the active ingredients using solvents. And during this process, we'll actually concentrate these aflatoxins. In fact, we had a manufacturer that we used to obtain a raw material, and this raw material had a concentrated amount of aflatoxins. And when we did the investigation with the manufacturer, they realized it was in the starting material of that product. And unfortunately, they did not want to change their practice. They said, we don't test for that, so we're not going to require that type of testing. And even though they knew that this was a very toxic substance. And this is the problem we face in this industry. Many manufacturers rather keep their specifications so loose, so easy to pass, and that they miss many of this contamination because they don't want the material to fail. They don't want the investments they made into this material to fail, because that is loss of revenue. So why do I have a skull and crossbones here? Well, this is clandestine adulteration I'm about to talk about. This is where they're putting drugs into dietary supplement products that ended up killing people. And you find this very commonly in weight loss, testosterone, and sexual enhancement supplements. And this is a problem also seen in CBD products and synthetic marijuana, where they're putting illegal synthetic cannabinoids into the product because it's cheaper than really using the real thing. And these are cheap drugs made in usually overseas or domestically that are put into the product to give that clinical effect. The other scary thing of this is they're using old pharmaceutical technology where they use these things called analogs, which is basically simply just the same drug, except it's been slightly changed. And unfortunately, the slight change will cause it to have different side effects, but giving you still that clinical effect. And we saw this from earlier when I went over the current events and previous events of the industry, where you saw sibutramine, a legal drug used for weight loss, being put into green coffee seed extract, which is used for dietary supplement for weight loss as well. And there's 7 different analogs in there. And what that means is they're putting one analog into the process and putting it into commerce. As soon as it hurts somebody and gets caught by the FDA, they're then putting another one into commerce. And it's a cat and mouse game that happens over and over again. You'll notice with Viagra and Cialis, there's 150 different analogs. And then with QNL, we're ask our manufacturer to make sure they're screening for 130 different synthetic steroids and 370 different synthetic cannabinoids in our CBD product. So what do we do differently here at Quantum Nutrition Labs than any other manufacturer? And I think the big thing is that we do something called orthogonal testing. So what we do is use different but complementary techniques to analyze a sample to achieve a single endpoint. And what that means is that we're using different tests to come to the same answer, because each test has its own advantages that can overcome the other test's disadvantages. And what we require our manufacturer to do is TLC, which is thin layer chromatography, microscopy, macroscopy, ash, and acid insoluble ash. And I'm going to go through each one of those in a case study where we found different material that was adulterated that we saw with one test, but maybe not with another. I'm going to start off with HPTLC, which is basically TLC, just a more robust type of testing. And this is high performance thin layer chromatography. This is basically a fingerprint of the botanical, looking at the active ingredients within there. And what's great about this technique is that it actually was able to show you whether the material is the plant part, meaning whether it's roots, whether it's the leaves, whether it's the flower. It's also able to tell between closely related species, that it's, alfalfa instead of barley grass. And the disadvantages, though, it's very hard to see other contamination. So it'll tell you that it is barley grass, but is it barley grass with some starch, with some cellulose, with some sand? You're not able to see that. Here's a case study of valerian root extract. The first 2 lanes, which is, you'll see down there, says 1 and 2, is actually the material that we got in. The lanes 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the materials that are supposedly reference standards, meaning they've been positively identified by an expert to be valerian root extract or valerian root. And you can notice that lanes 1 and 2, 3 and 4 do not match. I mean, they looked just visibly different. 5 and 6 look similar. Looking at a different wavelength, you can clearly see there's a difference between 1 and 2 and 5 and 6. In fact, there's many of the bands or the coloring that you notice missing above 0.4. And why is that? Why are we missing those other materials? This was actually an organic valerian root extract. When we went back to the vendor rejecting the material, we talked to him about this material because it was organic and it's supposed to be good, right? Well, it was an organic valerian root extract extracted out with water. And you're like, well, that's fine. Well, the problem with water is that it actually doesn't pull out the active ingredient you need to make valerian root extract work, valerianic acid. And they used water because it's cheap, and there's a consumer demand to have organic, but to have a cheap product. And unfortunately, they made a product that really doesn't do anything, very weak. And this is a problem in this industry as a whole. There's a drive to meet consumer demand. And even though they may make a product that really is not effective. And we see this sometimes even with botanical material, where they extract out the actives and they leave what usually is used for feed. They sell that to manufacturers as the original product, with really none of the active ingredient present. So let's talk about other orthogonal testing, such as microscopy. And this is something done for thousands of years. It's looking at the materials to see what it actually is. So that piece of broccoli that you see to the right, I think everybody, as soon as they saw it, knew it was broccoli. It becomes much more difficult to identify if it's another type of botanical, and usually you need a botanist, but it's very cost effective, quick turnaround. Disadvantages is once you see something like the powder, you can't tell me that's broccoli. Even though it may smell like it, you can't tell me that's not broccoli with something else in there, such as kelp or grasses. You just are not able to do that by looking at the material or even smelling it. So what do you need to do once it's in powder form? You actually have to put it under a microscope and look at the cells, look at the histological features unique to that species. Once again, it's very cost effective. Doesn't take much to do this in terms of reagents and the cost. You do need an expert, though, somebody that's been doing this for many, many years. One of the reasons we partner with James Nilkababik at Flora Research Labs is because he is an expert. He is an industry expert, been doing this I think over 40 years. And even with him, it's sometimes difficult to assess the quality of the product. And another issue is that you're dealing with very small sample sizes, meaning you're going from thousands of kilos of material and you have to subset that down to 25 milligrams. And in that reduction process, you may miss the contamination that's present in the lot because of inappropriate sampling techniques. Here's a case study of turkey tails. Now, it's not really turkey tails. It's Coriolus versicolor, which is a type of fungi. And you could see from these two pictures that one is a lot of purple. And the purple means there's a lot of starch there present. And there shouldn't be actually any starch. So the purple shouldn't be there. And you notice the other picture has a lot of these crystalline shapes in there. Once again, that should not be present. In the next slide, you're going to see what it should look like. You can clearly see from this picture that there is no crystals, are very scant, and there's no purple. Also, if you notice, there's little hairs within there, and that's another requirement of the regulation is to identify whether it's the fungi is from the plant part, meaning the fruiting body, or the mycelium. And this is a requirement of all plants that you are required to show what part of the plant is it. Is it the roots? Is it the stem? It's the flowers. So the previous material, even though it was highly adulterated, let's pretend it wasn't, and you put that in a product and you called it fruiting body and mycelium, which is the requirement, that would be wrong because it was missing the fruiting body, even though all the tests showed it was turkey tails. And with the good plaintiff lawyers, they can come after you calling it misbranded. And the FDA could also call it misbranded because you say it's one thing when it really is another. This is a Siberian ginseng, which is considered an adaptogen. You can see a lot of material here, a lot of material that actually is not supposed to be there. Here's a side by side of that Siberian ginseng to a standard. Now, obviously, there's a lot of extra stuff there. And I have to ask everybody, would you eat this? Would you give this to your parents, your kids, or even your dog? I wouldn't. And that's a very easy way to assess the quality of material. Would you eat it? And this type of gross adulteration is something the FDA has recognized because we got over 25, our manufacturer got over 25 different barrels of this material and had about 5 to 10% of whatever this was. We didn't spend the time or money to figure that out because we knew it's just not supposed to be there. And these manufacturers, when they produce this, they don't expect it back. They're thinking you're not doing the quality testing like we're showing you here. And what the FDA has recommended if you get this is you should burn it. But nobody's going to do that because nobody wants to burn money. So what do? You return it back to that manufacturer, and what do? They ship it off to somebody else because they don't want to lose money either. So this is a big problem in this industry that's been happening for a very long time. And when I say very long time, let me give you an example of different adulteration that we've seen over the years. So in 2019, around September, Stanford University came out with a study showing with turmeric, there has been high levels of lead coming out of Bangladesh. And they recognized that maybe this has only been a more recent thing. I can tell you back in 2012, our manufacturers saw the same thing. They saw the same thing, but not out of Bangladesh, out of India, even though Stanford believed it was only coming out of Bangladesh. They were painting it with lead chromate, with 300 times the levels allowed by the FDA. So that way that material, that turmeric, looked fresh, looked bright orange, because maybe they had a bad crop or it was just very old material. So this adulteration has been going on for years. And the scary thing is, with the Siberian ginseng, that turmeric, we didn't buy everything they had. That means somebody, somewhere, is probably eating this material, is putting it in their body, hurting them in one way or another instead of helping them. Here's another study of alfalfa, and this picture of the high-performance thin-layer chromatography is beautiful. Wouldn't doubt this. It looked great. If this is the only test you did, would be passed. And they put this kind of pictures on top of a certificate of analysis, so it looks nice. Looks very CSI, if you will. However, when we took that same sample and put it in the microscope, we saw all this kind of crystalline granules there, starch granules actually, that shouldn't be present. And also this other crystalline material that looked like glass. So literally, they had glass that was accidentally ground up into the alfalfa during the grinding process. Unsure how, but it happened. And this starch, which may be cross-contamination. Once again, if you only did that first high-performance thin-layer chromatography, which many manufacturers only do, because that's the only requirement they see, because they think it's only one test they need to do, they would miss this. And somebody would be eating this. Actually, somebody is eating this somewhere. Here's another case study of organic turmeric. And this turmeric was perfect on the TLC. Didn't see any issues, passed, if you will. Once we put it under the microscope and we realized that there was adulteration. The manufacturers get very smart at hiding things sometimes. They know some people are doing different types of tests. So what do? With turmeric, it's a high starch material, meaning that it naturally has a lot of starch. But what we notice is that how it aggregates. You can see little squares in the right picture there. Actually indicates there's other types of starch that shouldn't be there. And what they did is put colored starch into the material. And this is, 1 degree of what we see. We've seen also carrot powder come in when it actually was no carrot powder. It was actually just pure colored maltodextrin. So what other tests do we do? Ash and acid-insoluble ash. These are usually tests to look at the inorganic impurities like calcium and other things to weigh down the material. Or for acid-insoluble ash, whether it's like sand, something that's other kinds of adulteration. And what I like about this test or these pair tests is that it looks at a much larger sample sets, meaning looking at 1 to 2 grams rather than milligrams, like I mentioned earlier, in microscopy. So it's kind of a catch net to see of other adulteration. Here's a valerian root and dandelion root we got in. Everything passed. TLC, we even did DNA on this, microscopy, until we got to acid-insoluble ash. And that acid-insoluble ash normally is supposed to be 2.5, 3% at max. And this was over 10%. We're like, okay, why are we seeing this? We put it under the microscope, and you see these bright spots? They're not supposed to be there. And that looks like some kind of sand. We actually took those samples and put it next to a silox band, which is sand. And you could see that the 3 pictures line up pretty well, meaning that there's most likely sand in there. We actually pulled new samples and tested it for microscopy again, and we found the material. So we missed it on the first try, even though the James Nilkababic has that much experience. He also, misses things, and we can't blame him for that. So without this test, we would have missed it. So where's the industry at? Back in 2011 to 2015, there was up to 76 different warning letters sent out each year. And warning letter is recognizing gross negligence with GMPs. And you could see there was a downward trend all the way to 2018 during the reorganization of the Office of Dietary Supplements. In fact, it was actually not an office before, which when they became an office, it actually had more funding because Congress and the federal government realized how big this industry is getting and the rampant adulteration happening. 2019, we had an increase in the amount of audits and the amount of warning letters. And this year, it's yet to be seen how many there are going to be, but there was quite a few periods with the COVID-19 where the auditing actually ceased because they were unable to go to the manufacturers. Here's a list of different citations. So when FDA comes and they make an observation, meaning they see something that's wrong, and this is what I mentioned earlier with the people that are audited every year, 58% have some kind of 483 or citation. Now, if the citation's bad enough, meaning they have gross negligence, that turns into a warning letter that you get later. You have to respond to these within 15 days when you get one. What's great for us at Quantum Nutrition Labs, our manufacturers had 2 audits back in 2012 and 2017 with 0 citations, 0 warning letters, of course. And that's difficult to do. One of the reasons is our manufacturer is USP CGMP certified, meaning they go through a robust third-party auditing process beyond what 21 CFR 111 requires. Because at the end of the day, we need to ensure that the material is what it says it is, and we want to make sure the trust is ensured with our customers. So what do you need to understand from all this? From everything I told you, probably scared you, that you need to ask questions. And, when the FDA finds issues, they do a lot of different citations over many years. ABH, which is a large manufacturer I mentioned in the previous slides, had citations all the way back to 2010. And they got their first warning letter in 2012. It took technically over 10 years to do the recall. And USP Labs that I mentioned was just indicted. it took them 3 years to be removed from the market. So these major violations, which was verifying product specifications, took many years to do something about it. So you need to ask your manufacturer, about his manufacturing practices, about his quality practices. And I'm going to give you a few questions you can ask them to really understand what they're doing. So the first question, do you have a well-defined manufacturing process? Meaning, do you have a third-party CGMP certificate? Once again, this is not required. You don't actually have to have that. But I think it separates the good manufacturers from the great manufacturers. Also, with this well-defined manufacturing practice, you need to have something called the MMR. This is a master manufacturing record. You can think of that kind of like a recipe, because every time you make a product, you need to make it the same way. Because if you don't, you will produce a different product with different side effects and will have something that you don't know how it's going to react to the human body. What kind of level of commitment do you have to quality and experience and headcount? I could have the 5 smartest people in the world, but if without more than 5 people, you're not going to be able to do everything. It needs more headcount. Our manufacturer has over 30 people in their quality department because that's what's necessary to ensure the quality of the product. What type of culture do your employees share? When you ask them that, they should tell you a culture of quality and safety. I think that's very important. Quality should be the ground they walk on. That should be throughout their sales reps, their quality unit, and their operations. Do you skip lot test? Now, this is actually allowed by the FDA. You can take a material, raw material, test for whatever the certificate of analysis and audit that manufacturer, and then you can skip many of the tests except identity and micro. And from what I've shown you, would you do that? Something we don't allow here at Quantum Nutrition Labs is to do skip lot testing because of what we've shown you. However, just realize people are allowed to do this, and some manufacturers take a little advantage of it. You're supposed to only skip maybe 1 lot or once a year. Many manufacturers do it 2 to 3 years at a time. So at the end of the day, would you eat that then? Would you take the risk? Would you roll the dice with your health? Also, you need to ask, how do you see yourself in comparison to the standards of the industry? I hope I've shown you need to go above and beyond those standards, because if you don't, you're going to be making subpar product. How are decisions made? They tell you, we're going to make the best decision for you. Well, what that means is we're going to make the best decision at the lowest cost. And it really should be data-driven. So if it costs more money, so be it, because that's going to make a safe product. Do you do orthogonal testing for your raw materials? What I just showed you. You need to do these multiple testing techniques to make sure that raw material is clean. Do you test beyond the minimum requirements of the industry? Once again, there's no one test tells you all. There's no oracle or silver bullet out there. You need to do more than one test. Do you formulate without harmful additives and excipients? This is something that our founder, Dr. Marshall, passed away 3 years ago in 2017, started his company by ensuring that they wouldn't have any unwanted excipients, such as magnesium stearate. And this is something back when they started 30 years ago was considered outlandish. He was considered a purinoid. And this has become something that every manufacturer now wants to do the last 5 years. It's what the consumer wants. They don't want anything that's, even if it's very small amounts, that might be harmful. Magnesium stearate has shown some immunitive suppressive properties. What is your company's corporate social responsibility policy and activity? So, beyond supplements, I think this is important. What are you doing to give back? Here at Quantum Nutrition Labs, we have over 600 solar panels. We use low VOC or volatile organic compounds in all our paint. We use natural stone, where we don't use any kind of toxic pesticides for pest control. We try to take care of the environment and reduce our carbon footprint. And that's important because we need to do more than just provide things for good health. So it's been 26 years since the SHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. And a decade after the publication of the CGMP's final rule, which is the CGMP's requirements by the FDA. And we are still facing a problem that up to 58% of the companies audited, which, remember, less than 5% of new companies are audited every year. 58% are failing. They're showing you they have one of these problems or one of the many problems. And most of those are what I'm showing you here. They're just not testing or not setting up the right testing. And they're showing that up to 20% of the companies in the world of the 10,000 manufacturers out there are probably not doing the right thing. And what I've shown you, and this is not us saying this, is auditors, less than 1% of the industry is doing. So do you trust who your brand is, who your manufacturer is? You need to work with a contract manufacturer and ensure they're adopting a quantum approach to manufacturing. All those questions I asked you to ask is our quantum approach to manufacturing. And it's there to essentially reduce your risk because blind trust is not acceptable anymore, and you need to have confidence in what you put in your body. You know, why have ordinary when you can have extraordinary product out there? And I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes. It's also an undeniable truth that there's a difference between what the responsible firms are doing and what is happening on the market more broadly. From the director of the Office of Dietary Supplement, Stephen Tave. And my last quote from William Edwards Deming, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." Thank you.